Umma is a reminder, really a warning, not to place our trauma on our children. We think we're protecting them by leaving them in the dark on what we've experienced, on what we've lived through, but ultimately all we end up doing is hurting them in the long run. We expose them to those same experiences that we tried to hide away from them, and ultimately push them away in our never-ending effort to kind of keep them safe, protected, and sheltered. So I recently watched the movie Umma. I enjoyed the movie for what it was. I didn't find it to be very scary. There is a message there that I really latched onto for myself, and that's this idea of generational trauma. I've never been one to really lean into the aspect of nature versus nurture. If you asked me in the years prior, I more so leaned heavily on the nature of someone's internal being the reason for them acting in the way that they do. This comes from my understanding of the sinfulness that is within every single human being because of the fall of our ancestral parents, Adam and Eve, and the curse that was placed on them, carried down to all of the generations afterwards. But lately, I see in having kids of my own that the way that I've been brought up seems to be something that I'm kind of projecting onto them. Very much so in an unconscious way. It's not something that I consciously wanted to do. In fact, I always found myself saying and thinking of the things that I would not do for my kids, and yet I seem to betray those desires more frequently than not. And watching Umma, this thought process started in my mind where I was thinking through what kind of a father I was, what kind of a father I wanted to be, and what I needed to change, do more of, do less of in order to achieve that goal. As we watched the movie, those thoughts kind of started to play over and over my head, and so now I'm here in front of a camera talking about him. But before I get any further into it, I want to thank you for clicking on this video and spending some time with me, Omar, your co-host. My lovely co-host is off and about doing her thing, so I wanted to just sit down and just talk out my thoughts, and hopefully you enjoy them. Hopefully you find some common ground. If you have any thoughts, please leave them in the comment below, and let's get right into this. Umma is about a woman named Amanda and her daughter Chrissy living an isolated life, living a lifestyle of separation from society. They are beekeepers. They kind of have a small business selling honey from the bees that they have raised, and just kind of go about their lives living without electricity. Amanda, you find that she was essentially abused by her mom and one of the ways that her mom would abuse her was kind of exposing her to an open cable wire from one of her favorite lamps. Amanda grew up to be in fear of electricity, and she told her daughter that being around electronic devices would cause her to be sick, which really was just a lie, for lack of a better word, of the PTSD that she has through what she experienced growing up. It's really not a complicated movie. Her uncle from Korea visits one day to let her know that her mom passed away a few months ago. And it seems that when her mom passed away was when the trauma kind of started to resurface. Amanda started having really nightmares, and that fear that she once had growing up seems to kind of be boiling up within her until the point that she's really not able to control it. So there's this belief in the Korean culture that when a parent dies, they never really leave. And so Umma, having died in kind of a state of suffering, seems to remain as a tortured spirit, intent on tormenting her own daughter. And the only way that Amanda could essentially rid herself is by performing a jessa, which from what I was able to read is really just kind of a ceremony where you honor your ancestors, and it really just brings them to peace. But from what I understand, it's not like a permanent thing. It has to be something you do on the anniversary of their death, almost like appeasing them as their torment continues to build back up, and then you kind of release that pressure. So through the course of this movie, Umma, which is the Korean term for mom, if I'm not mistaken, begins to torment her daughter because she basically died seeing her as an ungrateful, disrespectful person. She believes that her child is basically indebted to her. It's very much this: you serve your parents, they brought you into this world, so your life is almost like indebted to them for what they had to go through to bring you into the world and then raise you. Umma used to be a respected dressmaker in her hometown. She got married, and her husband desired to come to America, the land of opportunity, and her, as being a devoted wife, decided to leave the business that she had and follow her husband to a land that she did not know the language. She didn't know anything about it because, that was the devotion that she had to starting this family with this person that she married. It ended up being that she never acclimated well to this land. So the respect that she used to have, she no longer had it. She essentially felt lost, and that confusion developed into anger, and then that anger kind of was projected onto her husband. Her husband ended up leaving, so she had no one else to project it onto except for her daughter. So she would torture her daughter for disrespecting her. She'd lock her in the closet. She'd torture her with that, exposed cable wire, causing that electricity to run through Amanda's hands. And she would justify it to Amanda by saying, "You are feeling the pain that I felt." So Umma was very much centered around herself. And she felt tremendous grief over the life that she used to have and how she no longer had it. That caused Amanda to essentially run away. She ended up getting pregnant, gave birth to her daughter. She said she found no need for a husband, so she pretty much just raised her daughter up as a single parent. Chrissy is older now, and she's starting to, want to venture out into the real world. They're not completely isolated, so where that she doesn't know anybody. She, is tasked with riding her bike into town and seeing their family friend, or at least she calls him a friend, and he kind of sells the honey that they're able to produce in their bee farm. So she's not completely sheltered away from life. But as far as her upbringing, she is raised in an electricity-less environment, old-fashioned. They read books and they just spend their day working. But she, as most kids experience, wants to go out into the world and see what life has to offer. Amanda never really felt a need to be super protective until she sees that her daughter is interested in the real world. She finds a college application, finds out that Chrissy got it from their family friend. She approaches their family friend. He says he only did it because Chrissy asked him for it. So little by little, she's becoming suspicious and protective of Chrissy leaving the house that she built. You see that she's actually doing that which she was exposed to growing up. You see how she's trying to keep Chrissy at home and discouraging her from going out and creating a life of her own, saying that everything that she did, that she's done by buying these bees and learning how to become a beekeeper. She's saying that she did it for her daughter, and just projecting again onto her daughter her fears and her desires. So you kind of see that cycle repeating itself from Umma to Amanda, and then Amanda trying to do the same to Chrissy. Now what's crazy to me is how easily we can fall prey to that. And that's why I say that nature versus nurture. I would never really subscribe to that field of thought, but more and more as my kids grow up, I kind of do tend to believe that we take from our parents both the good and the bad. And in my own life, I see one of the things that I never wanted to do is kind of be this irrational, angry father who just was more concerned with maintaining his authority than raising up his kids with wisdom. Now, I am not saying that that was my parents at all, but I do see growing up the things that I was exposed to. I didn't want to do that to my kids, and even my wife as well, with what I've learned about her family. So it's ultimately about breaking that cycle that we kind of seem to be perpetually stuck in, and being intentional about doing something different for our kids. What I find interesting is just how easily we can fall prey to our baser instincts and not really and lose all sense of rationality when it comes to our kids being defiant of our wishes, our desires. Now, it's one thing when our kids are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's easy to exert your authority, but what I fear is never learning to deal with wisdom with my children, so that when they get older into their teenage years, I can't just yell at them and expect them to listen. I have to have already laid down the groundwork of being a father worthy of respect, and having my children understand that my job, my responsibility is to care for them, so that they see me as an authority figure worthy of respect, worthy of submitting to, until the point where they're old enough to venture out onto their own. And that's the thing that Umma never really understood with Amanda. She believed that her way of exerting authority was through pain, was through fear. And Amanda becomes possessed over the course of the movie by the spirit of her mom. And that was a warning that her uncle gave her when he came to deliver the news, that that poison that Umma essentially died with, that poison in her spirit, would slowly build to where it would eventually overtake Amanda unless she fulfilled her daughterly duty of performing that jessa and bringing Umma's spirit to peace. So there's that reluctance to honor our parents when we feel like we've been wronged by them, but at the same time, we kind of need to acknowledge the importance they have over us for us to really move on and move forward. So this idea of forgiveness is really strong in this movie. So that's another thing that I took away from this neglecting of forgiving those who have wronged us adds to the poison that's building up within us. And so we become resentful, we become vengeful, we become people filled with grief of our own, and then that gets exposed to our children. So a heavy theme on giving up of ourselves for the betterment of those kids that we're trying to bring up. It's easy to get stuck on this idea of being right to the point where we only end up doing wrong by our kids. And then when they grow up and we realize the error of our ways, the damage has already been done. And our kids are in the same state that we were when we left home. And that cycle just continues to repeat itself unless we are intentional about breaking it. Another aspect of the story, it shows how easily we can torment our kids with our own desires, our own obsessions, our own pain, ultimately at their expense. We drive them mad. They either abandon us or they die feeling that same inadequacy that we felt in life. We as parents, and it's something that I kind of think through and try to wrestle with in my mind, as I approach that mid-year point of my life, the concept of your midlife crisis, or what is perceived as a midlife crisis, is always on my mind, where we can get so hung up on what we desire, what we have yet to accomplish, what we have seen as our goal, and we end up projecting it onto them, thinking that that's what they want. And that's what happened with Amanda and this and the beekeeping, and how she would say that this was all her daughter's dream, but it really was just hers. And so we see them leaving the fold as a betrayal over us, when ultimately it was us who betrayed them by thinking that what we wanted was what they wanted. So Umma wanted the respect from those around her, and the way that she felt that she could get it was through her daughter. Amanda didn't want to be alone. Because of what she had to go through with Umma, she never really was able to understand what it meant to cultivate a relationship, and so she felt that her daughter was that doorway into that fulfillment, that feeling whole that we desire. She was trying to get it from her daughter, and she could get it from her daughter, but not in the way that she wanted, or not in the way that she thought she needed to do it. What she needed to do was impart grace, wisdom over her daughter's lives, teach her about the world, but do so in a way that would lead her down the path towards finding fulfillment herself, not within, but from the relationships around her. I think that was the way that she could have gone about it. Instead, she just forced her to be home and tried to make her feel guilty for wanting to venture out on her own and just see what the world was like. I'm not saying it's foolproof, like this is guaranteed, but one of the things that I'm understanding is really that letting go little by little, and understanding that your kids are going to make decisions that you don't agree with, but it's not your job to make the decisions for them. It's your job to help them understand what can happen from those decisions, from those choices. And this is me still learning as I go and trying to gain wisdom from other people who have done it better, who've been there, and hoping and praying that I can do the best I can every single day. I think it's an honorable thing to desire the admiration from our kids, but it's so easy, and I speak for myself, it's so easy to succumb to our baser instincts, and I feel like sometimes all I've accomplished is becoming the enemy of my kids and fearing that I'm going to become the thing that they hate. It's a battle I engage in constantly. I want to impart to my kids that grace and generosity, but it can feel extremely difficult to do so when my kids are openly defying me, breaking the rules, and it takes a lot to hold myself back and not bring myself down to their level, where if they're screaming at me, I'm not reciprocating. I have to understand that I am the adult in this relationship. I am the one that should try to maintain order and try to bring them up to my level, that level of adulthood, of responsibility, of wisdom, of grace, and not let them bring me down to their level. It's easier said than done. Like, how do you display that authority while also not letting the power get to your head? And that's where I mentioned earlier, like right now, I can try to fear them into submission. But that's not what I want. I don't want to create a relationship built upon fear. I want a relationship built upon love and trust, grace. I use that word grace a lot. I think that encompasses that word, that grace, that ultimately we can know nothing of apart from Jesus Christ, who displayed that grace to us when he carried out the plan of God the Father and took our place on the cross, carried that sin so that we can now have that relationship with the Father and have that peace that transcends any earthly understanding, and we find security in him, so that we can spend eternity with peace and joy and in the presence of God. Not to say that everybody struggles with this, but I do think more often than not, parents are afraid to admit that they don't really know what they're doing sometimes and seek better understanding. But that's something that I work to avoid on a daily basis. So I really enjoyed my time with Umma. Again, I didn't find it very scary, but I did find it thought-provoking in my life. I'm glad that I was able to watch it. I don't know if I would watch it again. Definitely right now feels like a one and done. So if you're able to catch it on any kind of streaming service or even rent it for cheap, I think it's worth a watch. Pretty much sums up what I thought about the movie, and I'm glad I was able to check it out. And I'm very thankful for you spending your time with me. If you made it to the end of this video and you enjoyed it, I'm glad I was able to give you a few minutes of respite. And if you disagree with what I said, please leave your thoughts below in the comments section. Check out any of my other videos. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. It'll help as I work to build this up into something special. And if you like things non-horror related, I have another channel called The Reasonable Normie, where I talk things pop culture, kind of in the same vein as this channel, but in a non-horror setting. And with that, I have been your host, Omar. You guys have a good scream, and as always, be good.